Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to the Eastern Border. Sorry about the fact that previous episode was audio only, and I didn't post it on YouTube. Very much sorry about that one. It's just that as I was recording, well, a lot of things got into the way, and I had to publish it really quickly, and I didn't have the time to do it properly. However, currently it is February 2026, and we have some more news and interesting stuff to talk about. See, the Russian army has finally achieved its long-awaited dream of total independence and sovereignty from Western technology. Unfortunately for them, they achieved it by getting kicked off the server. For 4 years. 4 years in total. Yeah, 4. We have been watching the Second Army of the World fight a 21st century war using a subscription service they did not pay for. They bought drones from China, Iran, built some themselves. They bought chips from washing machines, and most importantly, they bought their command and control infrastructure from second-hand sellers of Elon Musk's tech via smugglers in Dubai and Kazakhstan. But earlier this month, the billing department finally caught up with them. We're calling this the whitelist catastrophe. And I mentioned this in the previous episode, but today we'll be looking into the Starlink thing, and one more issue that, they're complaining extra seriously about right now, because Starlink, well, is the least of their issues, to be honest. Currently, on war fronts and other more pop analytics shows, you can see that people are saying that Russia's just going to adapt and, we'll just get some other forms of communication. Well, I'll show you that just simply not that way. It doesn't work this way in Russia. So let's get back to this whitelist catastrophe. For years, the Ukrainians, specifically their Minister of Digital Transformation, well, the new one, Mikhailo Fyodorov, have been pushing the SpaceX to stop playing whack-a-mole with geofencing. The Russians were spoofing their GPS locations, pretending their terminals were in Poland or in Germany, while sitting in the trench in Zaporizhia. But now the rules have changed. It's no longer about where the terminal is, it's about who owns it. The whitelist protocol is a hard ID check. If your Starlink terminal's specific serial number is not registered in the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense database, the satellite simply refuses to shake hands with it. It doesn't matter if you are in Kiev or occupied Mariupol. If you are not on the list, you don't get the signal. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. The grey market, that massive corrupt river of smuggled electronics flowing from the UAE and Kazakhstan, crashed overnight. Thousands of Starlink terminals, bought by Russian volunteers for 3 times the retail price, turned into very expensive, white, rectangular paperweights or dinner tables. And with them, the eyes of the Russian army went blind. We aren't just talking about soldiers unable to check Telegram. We're talking about the collapse of the drone reconnaissance artillery loop. The reaction from the Z-Patriots was a mix of fury and a strange, fatalistic acceptance. Platon Mamantov, one of the more cynical voices from the front, wrote, and I quote, "You ask, how is it without Starlink? My dears, we have been fighting NATO proxy army for 4 years, using NATO satellite internet. Is it not surprising that they turned it off? Is it surprising that it took them this long? That is surprising." He claims the army will fight on, but admits the luxury of having a terminal at every dugout is over at this moment. Others, however, are way less stoic. Rybar, the massive propaganda channel that usually tries to smooth things over, admitted that the front in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions is destabilizing. That is a polite military term for we're losing control. But I do have to admit that it looks way more worse than it should on Putin's maps, seeing as, Ukrainians didn't advance as much as the Russians lost, at least on paper, because Russians have taken a lot of territory on credit and didn't actually control it. So now the soldiers were using it to doing a lot of, to a lot of incompetent generals. Archangel Spetsnaz, however, was even more blunt. He reported that in places like Ternovatia, the enemy, meaning the Ukrainians, has broken through because Russian units have reverted to the communications technology of 2022. Back to using handheld radios. But now let's just think for a second about what that actually means and what does it, stand for. See, a modern war is fought in seconds. A drone spots a tank, sends a video feed to a tablet, the artillery commander taps the screen, and the shell lands. That loop takes 30 seconds with Starlink. Without it? Well, the drone operator has to land, look at the footage, pick up red radio, shout coordinates over a jammed frequency to a guy who writes them down on a piece of paper, who then calls the battery. By the time the shell is fired, the Ukrainian tank is 3 kilometers away and buying coffee. The panic in the Z channels is palpable. Channels like Bespilotное Bravstvo, the Unmanned Brotherhood, are issuing desperate warnings about scams. You have commanders paying 200,000 rubles to fraudsters who promise to unlock their bricked Starlinks. It's the sausage bot economy in its purest form. Even when the front is collapsing, someone is trying to make a quick buck of the desperation. They're warning soldiers, there is no unlock, there is no workaround, do not send money to the bots. And so, the high-tech, seemingly high-tech Russian army is currently frantically unrolling spools of copper wire across the frozen mud, trying to set up field telephones like it's 1943. They're begging volunteers for tupiki, ancient analog Soviet phones, because at least those can't be remotely bricked by a billionaire in California. The red lines have truly turned into brown lines, as the meme says. The Russian army bought its evolution instead of building it, and now the store's closed. And well, because nature abhors a vacuum, and Russian warrant officers abhor being poor, this technological collapse has spawned the greatest economic bubble since the Tulip Mania. We're calling it the analog gold rush. As soon as the Starlink terminals went dark, the price of copper wire in the Rostov region didn't just spike, it went vertical. We're hearing reports from our contacts in the logistics hubs that a standard spool of field wire, the kind you used to be able to trade for a bottle of vodka, is now trading for the price of a used Japanese car. And, my smuggler people over here, they also confirm this fact that they don't want copper. Not like we're giving them much, but they're asking for that a lot. And, the real star of the show, however, was the Baofeng UV5R. You know this radio is the cheap plastic Chinese walkie-talkie that airsoft players use on the weekends. On AliExpress, it costs $20. In the trenches of Donetsk People's Republic today, a Baofeng is worth $300. Why? Well, because it's the only thing that works. The great Russian military-industrial complex, which claims to possess analog of net, no analogs technology, is currently being outsupplied by a drop-shipping warehouse in Shenzhen. And the scene in the rear markets is pure cyberpunk dystopia. You see frantic officers running around the electronics markets in Rostov, throwing wads of cash at shady dealers for ancient TA-55 field telephones. These are heavy, bakelite bricks designed in the 1950s that require you to turn a hand crank to generate a signal. They were supposed to be in the museums, you know. Instead, they were stolen from military warehouses in the 90s, sold to surplus stores, and are now being sold back to the army at a 4,000% markup. The smugglers are calling it the Great Rewind. They aren't moving iPhones or graphics cards anymore. They're scouting the basements of grandmothers across Russia, looking for anything with a copper coil. It's the ultimate triumph of the Russian economy. The war started with hypersonic missiles, and it's ending with men bidding on the rotary phone so they can call for artillery support. Who needs Bitcoin when you have a rusted field cable? But, if this would be the worst part, well, that would be the episode, but it isn't. If the Starlink shutdown was a calculated high-tech strike by the enemy, the Ukrainians, what happened next was a drunken stumble by the Russian state itself, and absolutely no one is surprised at this. Just as the frontline commanders were screaming into their dead satellite phones, the geniuses at Roskomnadzor, the Russian censorship agency, they call themselves the Russian Ministry of Russian Oversight Agency of Information, decided this was the perfect moment to slow down Telegram. Yes, to limit access to Telegram and make sure it doesn't work all the time. And I really have to appreciate the dark irony here. For 4 years, the Russian government has been trying to build a sovereign internet, a Cheburnet, that is safe from Western influence. They failed. Instead, the entire Russian military operation in Ukraine migrated to a private app created by Pavel Durov, a man who fled Russia to avoid exactly this kind of government interference. Telegram isn't just a messenger for the Russian army. It's their battlefield management system. It's their maps, their intelligence distribution, their logistics network, and their secure line to the artillery battery next door. So, naturally, to protect the information space, Roskomnadzor throttled the only thing keeping the army functional. The reaction from the Z channels was immediate and even more apocalyptic than with the Starlink satellites. See, the channel 2 Majors, which is run by active duty officers, wrote a furious post detailing exactly what this slowdown means in combat. And he notes that here's the math of the modern war, according to these guys. With the telegram, a drone operator spots a target at 10 a.m. He drops a pin in the chat. The artillery commander sees it at 10.1. The shell is in the air by 10.2. Total time, 2 minutes. The target dies. Without telegram, well, whole different story. The drone operator spots the target. He tries to upload the coordinates. The spinning wheel of death appears. The message won't send. He has to crawl back to a dugout with a landline or radio. He calls the company commander. The commander tells the battalion calls the battery. By the time the order reaches the gun crew, it's 12 p.m. The target has moved, had lunch, and proudly laughing at them. As Archangel Spetsnaz put it, we're rolling back to the efficiency of First World War. And that aggression is not just about speed. It's about basic orientation. You have to understand that for the last 2 years, the Russian army has not been using topographic maps. Those things are classified, outdated, and usually locked in the safe in Moscow. Instead, the army has been running entirely on a civilian Android app called Alpine Quest. Oh yeah, by the way, another thing is the fact that on those maps, in the early ones, that's why they went to the Chernobyl and dug up the Red Forest too, so they stopped using that. So soldiers, download this Alpine Quest, download the offline maps of Ukraine from a Telegram channel and use it to navigate minefields, plot artillery, and find their way to the latrine. It was the Google Maps of the invasion. But Alpine Quest relies on map files that are shared, you guessed it, via Telegram. The files are huge, gigabytes of high-resolution satellite imagery. With the slowdown, those files are now impossible to download. So, we're seeing reports of units literally navigating by Yandex Maps screenshots from 2021 that they saved on their phones, or worse, tourist maps they looted from gas stations. We have Storm Z units wandering into their own minefields because they can't update the danger layer on their hiking map. They are fighting a 21st century war with a glove compartment map from a stolen Lada. But it gets worse. It's not just about missing the enemy. Oh, no. It's about hitting your own men. The channel Roman of Light grimly predicted that without the instant coordination of local chats, friendly fire incidents, especially from air defense shooting down their own planes, would skyrocket. If you can't quickly type, "Don't shoot the Tsar Su-34" into the regional air defense chat, that Su-34 turns into a fireball. The Z channel Месть Доброй Воли, or Revenge of Goodwill, summed it up best with a quote that should be carved in a tombstone of the Putin regime. The motto of Roskomnadzor is, "I am shooting myself in the leg while sawing off the branch I'm sitting on." They are so terrified of NATO narratives spreading on Telegram that they decided to deafen their own soldiers to stop them from hearing it. It's a level of bureaucratic suicide that's almost impressive if it wasn't so miserable and pathetic. But the stupidity of the Telegram ban goes deeper than just killing the artillery coordination. It is also an act of high treason against their own propaganda machine. For 4 years again, the Kremlin has relied on a massive decentralized army of these Z bloggers to keep the population mobilized. The big Akhranot of the channel who officially support the Putin's regime, Rybar, two majors, War Gonzo, are the soft power of the Russian invasion, much more so than even Solovyov. See, these are the ones who explain the average Ivan why they should go die in the trench. And where do they operate? Exclusively on Telegram. By slowing down the platform to fight NATO narratives, Roskomnadzor has effectively gagged the only people who are actually cheering for the war. As the channel Podled furiously wrote, quote, "Those who block Telegram are fighting against the Russian people, the Russian army, and the Russian faith." Vadim Trukachev, another Z intellectual, pointed out the grim irony. Quote, "By blocking Telegram, we are handing the global information space over to Ukraine. The Westerners do not read Vkontakte, they read Telegram. And, well, listen to this show, thankfully. I really hope that you do, or just watch it. If you ban us, the only voices left from Russia will be the liberals and the defectors." And that is, actually pretty true and accurate, because, well, what else is there? What else is there to add here? And those Russian liberals, they're not very effective, to be honest. So, not only did they blind their artillery, but they also cut the tongue from their own propaganda. They have silenced the patriots to protect them from the West, leaving the information field for wide open for, well, people like me. Yeah. And honestly, I appreciate the help. But the real cherry on top of the shit sundae came from the man who lives in a different reality altogether. Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary for Putin himself. When asked about the panic spreading through the army because of the Telegram shutdown, Peskov straightened his expensive tie and said, and I quote here because this is glorious and simply amazing, "I do not think that one can imagine that frontline communication is provided via Telegram or any other messenger. It is difficult and impossible to imagine such a thing." Impossible to imagine. Oh boy, that's impossible to imagine for most of the pop war analysts out there as well. But the man whose job is to know what's happening in the country really cannot conceive that his second army of the world runs on a free app made by a guy the same government who is fighting this war tried to arrest. Oh, the Z-bloggers exploded instantly. They call Peskov's world the planet of pink ponies, as usual. Anastasia Kashavarova, one of the loudest pro-war voices, posted a furious list of other things that Peskov probably finds impossible to imagine. She listed them. It is impossible to imagine that contract soldiers are unfit for service. It is impossible to imagine that officers steal volunteer cars to drive to brothels. It is impossible to imagine that humanitarian aid is sold in markets. It is impossible to imagine that secret documents are sent via WhatsApp. It's impossible to imagine that 48,000 veterans are on a waiting list for housing while generals steal billions. And this, comrades, this is the fundamental disconnect. The Kremlin thinks the army is fighting a war with secure sovereign military communications systems. In reality, the army is fighting with the cracked screens on Chinese smartphones, desperately trying to catch a Wi-Fi signal from a burning Starlink terminal using the app that their own government is trying to block. Peskov says it is impossible to imagine. Soldiers in the trenches are saying that, instead it's impossible to survive without it. However, while the Russian state is busy destroying its own logistics to fight a ghost, the other state is actually moving. But for first, I was accepted as a Latgalian, the official moonshine here. I'm gonna have a little sip because this episode was hard to write, and I need to make a toast here. Those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you can see me pouring this. This is the smoothest moonshine you'll ever see. Doesn't matter that it looks weird, the best one out there. And I would like to raise a toast, which I'm going to be drinking with my tea here. I would like to raise a toast for Roskomnadzor and their glorious wisdom. Oh, and while we're at it, check Foreign Policy magazine. I just published a new article there about why they are angry at Anglo-Saxons. That's going to be nice too, but like I said, here's for Roskomnadzor. This is really good, though. However, there's other things that we must talk about in this break. First of all, this is where our friends at Card for Ukraine come in. Well, Roskomnadzor is blocking the VPNs the Russian volunteers used to buy socks. Card for Ukraine is turning pickup trucks into mobile machine gun nests and medevac units. The Christmas tree trucks campaign is still rolling, I hope at least, until the end of February, because we still have a lot of ground to cover. Unlike the Russian logistics trucks stuck in the mud without GPS, go to the cardforukraine.com, links in the description, and help the good guys mobilize. And if you want to look good while watching the Second Army of the World, search for Wi-Fi signal, check the Eastern Border /shop.fortworld.com. Also links in the description, just with everything else. We have gear that doesn't need the VPN to work. And also everything that you buy with Club of Angry Patriots stuff in it, well, that goes straight to the Ukrainian army. And finally, if you want to hear the uncensored, unslowed down truth about what's happening in the swamps of the Wild East, which is this place, join the Patreon at patreon.com/easternborder. And you'll get the satisfaction of knowing that you're funding the journalism that Peskov says is impossible to imagine. And I'll make sure to poke Evit about those fairy tale episodes as well. But now back to the panic. See, Telegram wasn't just the nervous system of the Russian army. It was its supply line. For 4 years, the Russian Ministry of Defense has been unable to provide its soldiers with basic necessities. Drones, scopes, secure radios, thermal blankets, even decent socks and bags for their dead. Everything modern, everything that actually works, all of that comes from volunteers, which is something that, again, I'm throwing shade at these people running war fronts here. These guys don't understand. And where do these volunteers organize? Guess what? Telegram. Now, thanks to Roskomnadzor's brilliant strategy to fight NATO, the supply line is being strangled. The Channel 2 majors reported a story that is perfectly encapsulating the insanity. A volunteer fund spent 6 months trying to import 12 night vision drones from China. These aren't toys, these are the eyes of the infantry at night. Same FPV ones like I do, but, with night vision cameras. They finally got them to the border. And what happened? Well, Russian customs seized them. Not because they were illegal, but because the paperwork didn't match the new, stricter regulations that no one understands. Lucky for us. Now, the customs officers are threatening to open a criminal case for smuggling. 12 drones that were supposed to save Russian lives are now sitting in a warehouse in Skodyanska collecting dust while the bureaucrats debate the finer nuances of the law. And it's not just customs. The blocking of VPNs means that the fundraising channels are just dying. Parad Domoy, or Time to Go Home, writes that many of the people who donate money are older folks. They don't know how to install a VPN. They don't know how to bypass a block. And most likely their younger relatives are against the war and won't help them anyways. See, these guys just standardly open the telegram, see the spinning wheel, and give up. The flow of money, the money that buys the Mavic drones, the tourniquets, the generators, that's drying up. One of the volunteers wrote, quote, "The blocking of telegram is the direct strike of the rear. You're cutting off the hands of the people feeding the army." And he's, thankfully, oh so much right. See, the Russian government just turned off the app where the tech is bought and sold and succeeded. It's a masterpiece of self-sabotage. They are literally starving their own soldiers of equipment to protect them from harmful information. As Historian Alcoholic, another Telegram channel, noted, the ban on Telegram is simply a higher quality blockade of the people's supply of the army. Ukraine tries to do this, but their own government does it better. And of course, we cannot forget about the hardware side of this tragedy. See, for years, Russian officials have been bragging about the Aya-T1, the so-called sovereign trusted phone produced by a subsidiary of Roscheck. That was supposed to be the iPhone killer, the secured device that every officer would carry. Well, it turns out that the Aya-T1 is just a rebranded, low-budget Chinese handset from 2019 with a hardware disconnect switch that physically turns off the camera and microphone. That's the security. Switch. And the best part, it runs on Aurora OS, a Russian operating system that supports almost zero apps. No Telegram, no WhatsApp, no offline maps. It's a rig that can make phone calls. If the cell towers aren't jammed on that day, that is. It's like, you could have picked like Nokia 3310, the famous super hard phone, and that would at least survive the bombings or something. But the things just get better from there. So, what do the officers do? Well now, they leave Aya in the safe to keep the inspectors happy, and they go to war with a cracked Samsung or a Xiaomi they bought at a mall in Rostov. And the RKN blocks Telegram, and on the Xiaomi, they're left holding two bricks now. One that was born useless, and one that was made useless by their own fucking useless government. You might be asking though, Kristaps, surely the great Russian state has developed its own military messenger. Surely they don't actually rely on a free app made by a libertine tech bro in Dubai? Well, technically, yes. Technically. There's a special military messenger. It exists, it has a name. Some call it the Blue, some call it the Bruise, but mostly they call it the thing doesn't work. The channel callsign Bruce shared a story that perfectly illustrates the tragedy of the sovereign alternative. Picture this, guys. A Russian drone pilot is flying a thermal drone at night. He's hunting. He crosses into the gray zone, that terrifying strip of land between the trenches where anyone moving is usually just a target. Suddenly, he sees heat signatures, a group of infantry moving in the dark. Now, in a normal war, or even in this war a week ago, he would drop a screenshot into the local Telegram chat and ask, "Who is walking at grid defense 1234, ours or theirs?" The answer would come back in seconds, like, ours don't shoot, or just, kill them all. But now the Telegram's throttled. The pilot has only to play by the rules. His messages are commanded. His commander on the secret official messenger. The commander, who probably hasn't opened this app in weeks because it crashes if you look at it wrong, has to log on. He then has to message the neighboring regiment. "Comrades, are these your men?" And while this digital paperwork is being filed, the pilot is hovering above the heads of 12 men. Finger on the release button, wondering if he's about to kill Ukrainian infiltration team or his own friends from the 3rd Platoon. In this specific story, the answer finally came back. They're ours. The pilot, sadly, well, for us, sadly, for them, luckily, I suppose, didn't drop the grenade. But Bruce notes the terrifying reality. If he had followed the protocol strictly, or if the secret messenger had lagged just for 30 more seconds, these men would be dead. The pilot hesitated. Let's save them. But you can't fight a war on hesitation alone. You can't rely on a messenger that requires a login, a password, and a prayer to St. Javelin just to send a text message, right? The Russian army calls this secure communications. Soldiers call it a death trap. And as Bruce sarcastically notes, if the neighbors were smarter, they would have warned us beforehand. But they couldn't, because the app that lets them do that, Telegram, was busy loading a spinning wheel courtesy of Roskomnadzor, right? The secret messenger is a myth. It's a digital Potemkin village. And now Now it's the only thing standing between a Russian soldier and a nice little friendly warning shot that turns into a friendly fire incident. And while the pilots are struggling with their own moral dilemmas in this area, the infantry is facing a much simpler, much louder problem. They call it the Baba Yaga. These are the heavy Ukrainian agricultural drones. Massive hexacopters that sound like a flying lawnmower. They come out at night. They carry anti-tank mines. They're terrifying, but they're loud and slow. In a functioning army, they're manageable. You have a dedicated Skywatcher in every platoon. When the Skywatcher hears the buzz, he drops a voice message in the local sector alert chat, Air Baba Yaga Sector 4, take cover. Every phone and every dugout in the 2-kilometer radius lights up. The men wake up, grab their thermal sights, and shoot it down. Well, at least try to. It's a system that at least works on paper, right? But now? Oh, now. Now the Skywatcher hears the buzz. He opens the telegram. And guess what? It's the spinning wheel yet again. The message air hangs in digital limbo. He tries to switch to the radio, but the frequency is jammed, or the guy in the next trench is asleep. So, of course, the warning never comes. The men in the next dugout are sleeping, trusting the Russian system, which you should never trust though, and they don't hear the Ukrainian lawnmower unit is directly overhead. And then an explosive drops to the roof. And everyone liked that. We're hearing reports from the Zaporizhia front that the entire platoons are being dismantled this way, night after night. Not because they didn't hear the drone, but because the warning couldn't travel faster than the drone. They're dying in silence because the Roskomnadzor decided that a sector alert chat was a threat to national security. It's the ultimate betrayal of them, which is why I recommend you read my article in Foreign Policy magazine. Because the silence of the chat is deadlier than the noise of the Ukrainians. But while the soldiers in the trenches are worried about being blind, the generals in Moscow are worried about being dead. Because the chaos isn't digital anymore. It's kinetic, and it's happening inside the ring road. We need to talk about the General Vladimir Stepanovich Alekseyev. If you follow the show, you know his name. He's the first deputy head of the GRU. He was the man who sat on the bench with Prigozhin in Rostov while during the mutiny, negotiating the fate of Russia while looking like a tired uncle at the barbecue. See, after Prigozhin's convenient plane crash, it was Alekseyev who inherited the orphan Wagner units, rebranding them into Volunteer Corps and Redat. He became the viceroy of mercenaries, the man holding the leash of the Shadow Army. And on February the 6th, in the quiet safety of northwest Moscow, someone put a bullet in him. The official media is trying to hush it up, calling it a health incident or ignoring it entirely. But our sources at the Screaming Panic in the ultra-nationalist Telegram channels confirm it. This was not a Ukrainian drone strike, this was a hit. This is spies killing spies. This is the high politics of the collapse. When the internet goes out on the front line, soldiers die. But when the first deputy head of the GRU gets clipped in his own stairwell, it means the regime's eating itself. The sausage bot pact. Where, the elites get to steal in peace as long as they show loyalty. Well, that stuff is over. The struggle for resources, for control of the private armies, and for the remaining scraps of the budget has finally turned violent. So picture now the mood of the average Russian officer right now, okay? His radio does not work. His Starlink bricked. His Telegram is blocked. And his boss in Moscow just got shot by a rival faction. That sound from the basement Romanov Saponkov talked about. Oh, that's getting louder. If you listen closely to the Z circles right now, you won't just hear anger. You'll hear fear. Not fear of the Ukrainians. They actually have started to respect the enemy. But fear of history. The most intelligent among them, of those people with barely 3 brain cells, right, are starting to realize that they have seen this movie before, and it always ends with a basement in Yekaterinburg or a tank shelling the White House in Moscow. The channel Ramzai, run by military experts who usually cheer for missile strikes, posted a chilling comparison to the late 1980s. He wrote, quote, "I remember the end of Gorbachev era, the apathy, the moment when the most loyal supporters of the Soviet Union usually simply stepped aside and let the country fall because they realized their leadership was incompetent." He warns that the Shudras, the common people, are tuning out. They're tired of this war. They're tired of their lies. And when the crisis comes, they will not defend the Kremlin. They will watch it burn on TikTok. Then there is Verum Regnum, who gave us the metaphor of the year. He described Russia as a bus hurling down a mountain highway. The windshield is painted over with charts showing record economic growth. The side windows are blocked by the portraits of the great leader. The brakes were sold for scrap metal 3 years ago, and the drivers, the criminal elites, are separated from the passengers by a blast-proof wall. They can't hear the screaming in the back. They think the ride is going great because the reports say so. But the passengers, the soldiers, the volunteers, the Z patriots? Oh boy, they can feel the G-force. They know this cliff is coming. And finally, Roman Sapetkov, one of the most honest war correspondents left out there, put in terms that that'll make your skin crawl. He wrote about the desacralization of power. He said, when the people start to doubt the sanity of the Tsar, the mood changes. They stop looking at the flag and start looking at pitchforks. And from the basement, you begin to hear a sound. A low, unpleasant sound. Like the beast waking up. And that sound, comrades, that sound is the time of troubles that I have been talking about on the show for years now. That is the sound of a regime that has broken its social contract. They promised glory, they delivered mud, and expensive mud at that. They promised a high-tech empire, they delivered a ban on Telegram. The Z patriots are armed, they're angry, and now, thanks to government's own incompetence, they're deaf and blind. And in the darkness, they're starting to light machines looking for people who sold them the defective bus. The revolution isn't coming from the liberals in London. It's coming from the trenches in Donetsk. And it's going to get very, very, very ugly. And this brings us to the final conclusion. This whole economic theory and the theory that they're going to collapse and disperse among themselves that we have been discussing on years for now is turning into an undeniable fact. The Russian state did not modernize. They just went shopping. They bought drones from DJI. They bought chips for washing machines. They bought their entire command and control infrastructure from Elon Musk and Pavel Durov. Indirectly, of course, but still. They built a 21st century facade on a 19th century foundation. Now, the subscription is cancelled. The shop's closed. The red lines, those scary warnings Vladimir Putin loves to issue, have officially turned into brown lines. That is the mud the soldiers are currently crawling through, unrolling copper wire like their grandfathers did in 1943. The Russian army is now deaf because they banned Telegram to fight NATO narratives and blind because they got kicked off Starlink to fight NATO technology. They're fighting the most transparent, data-driven war in human history with Chinese radios and a prayer. This isn't the end of illusion. This is, well, the beginning of utter decline. The second army of the world has been exposed as a zombie train that just ran out of data. And every Russian knows when the train stops in the middle of the swamp, the driver locks the door. The passengers start breaking the windows. But that's it for today. До свидания, товарищи. Please go and click that link for Card for Ukraine in the description and maybe think about becoming a patron of the show. Happiness is mandatory.